one thing we do need is we need to, the rumors or stories going around town abounding that this person's items were stolen. Okay, we're going to pause for a minute, and if anyone wants to stay on, we're going to do the tomorrow's blot as well. Kum Lena Block Gemara. This is Sunday's Gemara Daf Kuf Tez Vav. Says the Gemara. Itmar, we learned Gonav Umachar. What happens that Reuven owned something, Shimon stole it from Reuven, and then he unsold it. And the Achikach Huker Haganav. And afterwards, the Ganef was, they found out who the Ganef was. They found who the Ganef was. So the question is, so the owner, who does the owner go to? Does the owner go to the buyer or to the Ganef? So Rav Mashmei Rav Chia, Rav says the name of Chia had in addition. Rav says in the name of Chia that he goes to the Ganef and he says to the Ganef, give me back my item. He has no right to go to the buyer, he has to go to the Ganef. Now that we know who the Ganef is. It's when we don't know who the Ganef is, you go to the buyer. But you know the Ganef, you should go directly to the Ganef. However, Rabbi Yechon no, he has every right to go to the buyer and says, give me my stolen goods back. And you have to then go deal with the Ganef to get reimbursed because you bought my item that was stolen. In fact, I can say they're not arguing. Before you, she has every right to go to the buyer and say, look, it's still mine. But before years, she can go to the buyer. It's my object. But once it was years, the buyer now has a right to keep it. Then he's only entitled to go in addition. He goes to the Ganef, says to the Ganef, you stole my item, reimburse me. But everyone agrees with Chizah. Chizah is the one who said that Gozel v'loinis yai shabar. Chizah said that there was no yish, then you have a right to go to collect from either one. And even if the item is no longer in existence, you can go to the buyer and collect from him because there was no yish. It was your item. The buyer says, well, you're telling me there's no argument. But the gift that we give to a kohen, there's no particular kohen that ever would abandon hope. So any matana you have to give the kohen is like, what? There was no years. And let me ask you a question. And we have an interesting argument there as well, even though it's before years. You said before years, there's no argument. Everyone says you can go directly to the buyer. No, it isn't. It's now we learned the following. We know that 24 gifts you give to a kohen, and when you have an animal, you have to give to the kohen. And part of the give the kohen, one thing you give the kohen is the stomach. So what happens if Amalei, a guy went to a butcher and said, give me the intestines, the innards of the para, and the stomach was still there. That should have gone to the kohen. Then then the buyer has to give that to the kohen. He has no right to turn to the butcher and say, hey, you charged me for it, because the butcher definitely didn't charge you for it. What about Lokem and Mishkal? If we bought it by the weight and the butcher put the entire intestine, the innards on the scale, and then he charged them accordingly, that means he charged them also for that which belongs to the kohen, which means they're stealing from a kohen. The butcher now is the Ganef. He stole it from the kohen because he charged this buyer for the innards, which really belong to the kohen. So the butcher is the Ganef, and the buyer is an innocent buyer who ended up buying it. Noishna the kohen, it says over here that he gives it to the kohen. He has to give it to the kohen. In other words, the kohen can go to the buyer and collect it back. Umenakaloi minadami goes back to the butcher and he has to deal with it. So we see clearly from here that the kohen doesn't have to pay out this person. He has to go back to the butcher and collect from the butcher. Rav said, when do we say that he gives it to the kohen, that the buyer has to give it back to the kohen, and then he turns around to the butcher and he says, give me back my money, that he waited himself. If the tabach himself waited, the butcher himself waited, then the kohen doesn't go to the buyer to take it back. Then since the butcher himself was outright the Ganef, he waited everything else, the kohen only has a right to go to the butcher. He cannot go to the buyer. Even though it's before Yush, yet he cannot go to the buyer and take it back. So we see that Rav's view that says that you go to the Ganef and not to the buyer is even before Yish. Not like you said, it's only talking about after Yish. The Gemara says, you misunderstood. Amo, what Rav meant to say, he was Afdinim Matabach. Of course, you can go to the buyer because before Yish, you go to the buyer. You can even go to the butcher. Well, what do you mean, even to the butcher? Because Mountain, I would have thought, Ein Matanas Kunin Exalted. All Matanas Kunin belong to Hashem, and he passes on to the Kohanim. So I would have thought that the Ganef never really had it because the Matanas Kunin never really goes on, nobody really owns it. Commercial law, that no, you can go to the butcher because he went through the motions of being a Ganef. So they are arguing with my plea. So what exactly is the crux of their argument? But Rav Chizah, they're arguing in Rav Chizah's point itself. They're arguing before years whether you can go ultimately to the purchaser, and or Rav, according to Abaye, Rav says even before years you cannot go to the purchaser. You only go to the Ganef himself, because the purchaser wasn't a Ganef. That's one version. Rabbi Zvid says, no, we're talking about going to Siyaisha, Bailin, Biyadlike. The owners gave up hope. They didn't give up hope while the Ganef had it. The argument between Rab and Rabbi Yechon is when the owner gave up hope once it was already in the domain of the buyer. And the question is, okay, we know that years combined with Shin Rishus means the buyer can keep it, but it doesn't matter which order it is. So one opinion says that has to be years first, and then Shin Rishus, because Shin Rishus is not a kinyan. Shin Rishus means that it came into your possession legally. So therefore, you need the years first. Other opinions say, no, Shin Rishus is a form of a kinyan, like Shinei Hashem, Shinei Maisa, and therefore we don't care the order. And that's what's going on here. Did not give a hope in the hand of Megana. This is the argument. Mars of one of them holds Yush the Achikach Shinrishus Kani. Only if the Shinrishus took place after the Yush. Or the Shinrishus the Achikach Yush like Kani, but the reverse order is not effective. Well, Mars of it almost says Loishla makes no difference. Now Papa comes a different answer. Now Papa says like this. The gleam, the kuliyamale pligi, if there's an object there, for example, a shirt, there's no question that the owner can go back even to the buyer and take his shirt back. But you know the argument here is. The argument here is, but also by takana sashuk. The arguing that so we're talking about before years, and they're arguing whether we made takana sashuk, a special takana, to say to the buyer that even though you bought stolen goods, but if we're going to help you out, that you're going to get compensated, because otherwise people will stop buying things. The Gemara says here, that's the argument here. Rav Mashmei Reb Chi Amar Hadini Marishan. Rav said that the din is you go back to the first guy. So this is what he says. Everyone agrees that I can take the shirt back. I don't have to pay you. I take the shirt back. And you can't say, oh, but I'm an innocent buyer. No, you bought stolen goods. Before years, you stole my shirt. You got to give back to me. And like Rabbi Chizah said, you collect from either one. But the Rav says, the Nemechi Hadin Im Harishan. Rav says that the din is where the first guy Dina the lekeach the lishkol zuz meganev also by the shuk. Rav says that the buyer does not the owner of the shirt does not have to reimburse the buyer at all in this case because it's before years, and the owner of the shirt takes the shirt back and says, you want to get compensated? You bought it from the guy there. Go to him. He'll take care of you. There's no takana shuk here. And Rabbi Yechon says, no, hadina masheni. Rabbi Yechon disagrees. He says that the owner has to compensate the person because he made a special takana shuk. Din l'kei delishko b'balabais, but also by takana shuk, will make it a shuk and help him out. Says the Gemara. So one asks a question. Rav doesn't believe in the concept of takanas ashuk, that sometimes just to make life go on, we have to make certain laws as unfair as they are to certain people. But this is for the vast majority. In order for business to continue to thrive, you have to give them some comfort that if they end up buying stolen without realizing it, that they're not going to lose out. Rav doesn't believe in that principle, but Rav Huna is a Talmud of Rav. We'll assume that if he's a student of Rav, he probably follows Rav. The Chanabisha Ganef, Chanabisha was a terrible Ganef, and Ganav Glima, he stole a shirt, the Zovna, and he sold it. Also, that person, the owner of the shirt, came to Rav Huna and said, can I go to the buyer and collect it back? He said to the person, Zil Shade Avit, he said, go to the buyer and pay him out for the shirt. So we see clearly, why should he pay out the buyer for the shirt? It's stolen goods and still yours. Because it's that Takanas Ashuk. So Rav agrees to the Takanas Ashuk. So the answer, shiny Chanal Bisha. Chanal Bisha is unique. Even the Lekalish Talumne, there's no way in the world, he's such a strong armed person, people were scared of him, and there's no way in the world you'll ever get your money back. So Kalai Hukadam is as if you don't know who the Ganef is. We said before, if you don't know the Ganef is, you have every right to go to the buyer. Even though we know Chanal Bisha is the Ganef, you're not going to go to him, you're not going to approach him, so therefore it's like non-existent. We don't know who the buyer is. Omar Rava says, Rava, im Ganef a first move, but if everyone knew this person was a Ganef, then the buyer should never have bought from him in the first place, then there's no Rachmanas, there's no Takanas Ashuk. Lo also going to shuk. For about Chanah Bish in this story, Chanah Bish, the first one, everyone knew who he was, but also about Chanah Shuk, and yet you made Takana. So we answered, Nihidem of first Beshus, everyone knew that he was a terrible person. We didn't know he was a Ganef. Each what we learned. Ganaf. Shimon stole from Reuben. Then he took that item, whatever he stole, and he used it to pay off a loan of his. Ganaf, he stole from Reuben. He bought merchandise, he owed money on it, and now he took that item that he stole from Reuben and paid it off as merchandise. In these two cases, everyone agrees we don't do takana shuk. In other words, the owner can go to the lender and take his shirt back. Why? And the logic is very simple. There's no reason to help the lender out. You didn't lend money to Reuven. We say to the lender, you never lent money to Reuven. You never lent money to Shimon because he's giving you a shirt. You didn't even know about the shirt at the time. So now that Shimon went and stole the shirt in order to pay you, what right do you have to it? So Reuven, the owner of the shirt, can come and collect it. And there's no reason to help you out in this case because you lent the money to do the shirt. You lent it because you trust him. It's your problem. You didn't give him the money because of the shirt. What happens? Mashkanta Shavamosan the mayor. If let's say Shimon lends money to Reuben and Reuben gave security, which turned out to be was stolen, security that was worth $200, and the loan was $100. Now that makes sense. When you give a loan, you want security worth more than the loan, so you have no issues at all whatsoever of getting your money back. You'll never lend money with security that's worth exactly the amount of your loan because then what happened? The price goes down a little bit. You lost money. So if the stolen goods was 200 and you lent 100, then we can say you lent the money based on the stolen goods. So there's a takana shuk. We have to help you out if it turns out to be stolen. Also by takana shuk. But shava b'shava, if it was $100 loan for $100 security, Amema says, also by takana shuk, we're not going to help you out because we don't think you lent the money based on the security. So therefore, why should we help you out? Also by takana shuk, this is how you do help out. Then we say zavina shava b'shava. Now this is interesting. Let's say you bought something, let's say whatever, the value is $100, and you paid $100 for this, also but the takana shuk. Then obviously it turned out to be stolen goods. We're going to help you out. We need to make sure that business can continue to work. But shava ma meya b'masan, you bought something that was worth $100, you paid $200. Now that extra $100 you paid, why? Because obviously you wanted to gift it to that person. So we're going to say that even the initial $100, that even the value of $100 also is a gift, and therefore you're not getting back a cent. There's no takana over here. Rav Sheshes says, Loi asa by takana shuk. There's no takana shuk here. Why? Because since the second 100 was a gift, so was the first 100. And Rav Amar also takana shuk. Rav says, yes, we do make a takana shuk. That in fact, you can collect the whole 200 because we have to help you out. You overpaid, says he, because it happens. It's quite common that people overpay, not because he's gifting it. The hilchas of bekulu, the halacha finally is also by the takana. We always help out the buyers, the innocent buyers. Levad, the only time we don't is gona for part of a chayva, gona for part of a kefir. If the guy then used to pay off a loan, there's no reason to help you out. You didn't lend the money because of this. Abima Barnave, Chamud Ravina was the father of Ravina. Havimasev Hogav, he lent somebody Abba Zuze. He lent somebody $4, and Gonav Glima, and then the guy stole a shirt, and he gave it to him, as payment. Asyanella, and sorry, he gave it to him as security. Asyanella, Oisve Abba Zuze. In other words, he owed him money, and then he gave him security of a shirt, or afterwards, and then he lent him another $4. But they never spelled out the second loan of $4. Was that based on the shirt that he gave you? Or the shirt he gave you was sort of like a payment for the first loan or security for the first loan, and you lent him again because you trust him? And it's very different between these two cases. So this is what happened. Let's say who could have gone after they realized the whole thing was stolen. Also, he went to son-in-law. Interesting that he went to son-in-law to judge the case. Omar, he said to him, I guess they both accepted. Kamoi gona for part of a So the son of passing this. The first $4 you lent before you knew about the shirt. So therefore, we're not going to help you out. We're not going to help you out at all, and you cannot collect the shirt. Yeah. So therefore, since you did not lend the money based on the shirt, there's no takonas hashuk in this case at all. But the second lot of $4, you lent it because you based on the shirt. So therefore, we're going to make a takonas hashuk that you can go and collect the shirt back. So you take your money and give back the shirt. Rav Kohen, interesting name, Rav Kohen. The Dilma Glima Bahani Zuda Kamoy Yavanella. How do you know that the second loan was based on the shirt? And therefore we want to make a takanas hashoig. Maybe that the second loan was just the shirt took care of the first loan because he didn't know it was stolen, and the second loan was again a favor. He trusted him. In the second lot of $4, he believed him. He believed in the first place. Igalgal Milsa, so now there's a dispute. Igalgal Milsa, this thing, people talking about it. Multikama came from Rav, and he said, Hilchas Rav Koyin, Halacha like Rav Koyin. Nashar, there's a person from the city of Nashar. Gonav Safra, stole a book. Zovna le Papano, he sold it to a citizen from the city of Papano, but Tamnum Zuzi for $80. Also Papano, then the guy from Papano went, and Zovna le Bar Mechazoi, from somebody from the city of Chazor, but maybe for $120. Later on, they realized that this thing was stolen. We realized who the first person was. The first person, the guy from Nashar, the Ganef. We found him. Omar Abai says, Lezel Mora de Safra. Let the owner, the original owner of the book. So there were three people there. There was a Ganef. He sold this one buyer for 80, and that first buyer sold the second buyer for 120. So now the dinner you said before, you can go and get back the original book. So Abai says, Lezel Mora de Safra, the Yovle, let the owner of the book go and give to the Bar Chazoi Tamnan. Since the Ganef only received $80 for the book, so the original owner only has to pay $80. So he goes to the last guy, he paid $120, gives him $80 for the book compensation, and because the original Ganef only got 80, and he tells the last guy, you now are still owed 40, you go to the middle guy who made $40 profit on you, and you collect it from him. And the middle guy, and then I will go to the owner and try to get my $80 back. The Yovle the Bar Mechuzah Tamnin Zuzi v'Shokol Safri takes his book, but also Bar Mechuzah and the Sekai Chuzah will go v'Shokol Arboim, but will go to the Papna and get $40. Maskil Rover doesn't make sense. If you buy from the Ganef, you're the first buyer. Yet we help you out and say, you get fully reimbursed. This is one arm's length. He's totally innocent. We only get back $80, but boy, and he has to schlep around to get the other 40. Elomarav says Rabbi. Lezel Mara de Safra. No, the owner of the book goes, he gives him $120. The Shokol Safri collects his book. The Lezel Mara de Safra, and then the owner of the book, the Lishkol Aboim Panoit, then the owner of the book has to reimburse the second buyer completely. And then he has to get back and reimbursed again. He goes to the first buyer and says, look, you sold it for $40, a stolen item. You made profit 40, give me that profit. And then he goes to the guy and says, give me my 80 back. 80 from a shah. So the Mishnah. One guy had a barrel of wine, had a barrel of honey. The barrel of honey split. This guy poured out his wine, and he rescued the guy's honey. He doesn't get reimbursed. All he gets is the wage for the time he put effort in. But if he tells the guy up front, I'm going to save your honey, you're going to have to reimburse me, then if the guy agrees, of course he has to pay him out. A similar story. Two donkeys were swept away by the river. But your friend's donkey is worth a lot more than yours. So you want to be a mensch. You decided not to save your own donkey. And you rescued your friend's donkey. You lost now your donkey. All you get reimbursed is your time and effort. But he told him clearly, I'm going to save your donkey. Then he has to give it to him. So the Gemara. Interesting question. If I saved your honey, the honey was going to fall on the ground. You would have lost your whole honey. So it's like hefker. And if I saved your honey in my barrel of wine, then I should be the owner of your honey. Forget about getting paid only for the time. I should keep your honey because I've just got it from hefker. Why? I just acquired your honey because it was falling on the ground. You'd have lost it all. So it's hefker. And in fact, Milatani, we learned how to show you turn Kadiyan Hashem. A guy was carrying barrels of wine, barrel of oil, and he saw Shem Mishtabris. He saw that they're breaking and they're about to fall apart. Don't be a smart person and say, I have all these fruits in my house. I'm going to make this truma mice, and any loss that happens now, the Kohen loses, the Levi loses. You can't do that. And if he said that's worthless. So more answers, not a question at all. Said, it's talking about where there's no big loss. And our mission is talking about there isn't really a loss. It's not hefker. There was a rope, a tight rope around the barrel, sort of holding it together, and very little honey was oozing out of the cracks. And therefore, there's no real loss, and therefore, the guy from the wine can't say, "Oh, I'm the honey belongs to me," because it's not hefker. So he gets paid for it this time. Now the Gemara has a question. It says here, if he said that the truma meiser of this barrel, should be truma meiser, or the fruit should be truma meiser of my family, it's worthless. That's a question. But time the brayse, misha baba derech, you're traveling on the road, umais biyada, you have money in your hand. The anas connected. There's a guy standing there who's about to take all your money away from you. Don't say before the guy seizes your money, had he paid it, she yes, the base, all these fruits I have in my house. All these fruits I have in my house, I have to make like Ma'aser Sheni. I wanted to transfer the Kedusha to this money. And then the Ghana takes it, it's their problem. But if he said it, it is effective. You just said that that you can't. It says in the Braisa before that if you said it, it's worthless because it's like hefker, it's no longer your money because you're about to lose it, so no longer yours. It's worthless. And here it says clearly that the dvar of kayamin, the words are that with the case of the money, it's effective. Talking about a case that you could save it. Says the Gemara, if you're able to save it. If you can save it, then why can't you say? What do you mean you shouldn't say it, but if you did, it's all right. The is going to say that the paid is in my house should be on his money. The only way you can save it is through hard work. So shouldn't do it, but if he did, we'll say that it's effective. Says the Gemara, you tell me wherever there's a loss involved, you shouldn't say that I'm going to use this to transfer the kedusha because there's a loss. But Tanya, we learned how you shall tell you had 10 barrels of tevel. Tomei. You had 10 barrels of tevel, which means you have to give truma ma'aser. They're all tomei. The ra achas mehen shenishbar. You saw one of the barrels are broken and about to lose the contents. Oishin is galsa. Remember, if you have a pail of water or something that we're scared that snakes might enter and drink it, it's poisonous, and you're not allowed to drink it, you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to feed it to the animals. We'll soon see. Oimer, you can say harei hi trumas ma'aser al teisha chaver. You can say that this barrel is going to be truma. I have to give it to the Levi. Talk about a Levi owns 10 barrels of tamid. He says this barrel I have to give 10% to a kohen. This barrel should be that truma. But that's by wine. B'shemen leyasa came, but don't do that. No, by wine, since it's tummy anyway. What can the kohen do with it? Nothing. So if it gets cracked and I lose the oil, the wine, who cares? It makes no difference. No real loss. But oil, if there is a loss, if they have the kohen, as we'll soon discuss. By oil, if you're going to say that this goes to the kohen, now there's a barrel broken, it's about to lose oil, there's a loss because Talmudic oil can be used by the kohen. And now the kohen just lost all that oil. He can use it, the kohen use as fuel, the oil. And now he just lost all that oil. Says the Gemara, don't do that. Says the Gemara, Omar Abiyam even said, so now the chayda, if it's about to get lost, how can you say this will be truma? You just said before that there's a loss, you can't give truma. Omar Abiyam said, akol beis about karech level. There's a rope around it, so therefore it's not really a loss. It's not such a big loss, a small loss, and therefore if, you could do that by the wine. You could say that this should be truma. Okay, if it's broken and you hold the pieces together, I can still use the wine. Ellen is galsa. But if it was gili and a snake drank from it, what can you do with it? You can't give it to anybody to drink. If you know what the wine you can do? You can use it. They used to have all the floors of dirt floors. So they used to pour wine on the dirt floors to give fragrance into the house. Okay, nobody's going to drink it, but you can use it to pour. So therefore, there is, and the only reason why there's no loss over here is because it's sort of holding together the rope. Now, and what can you? So you might ask a question. In the case of this Gausa, what can the kohen do with it? What can the kohen do with it? So we say here, Vatanya, so you tell me pouring on the ground. Vatanya, we learned Mayim Shinas Galo. Once it was exposed, don't pour because there's poison floating around and somebody has cracks in their foot, poison might enter. Don't use it to mix cement. Don't use it to clean your house because you might walk their barefoot on it. Don't give it to drink to your behemoth because then somebody might eat from this animal and they'll be eating the poison with it as well. Taisa says you shouldn't give it to behemoth because you're killing your animal. That itself is a problem. And not the behemoth of your friend. So So if it's this galsa, it has no value whatsoever. Says the Gemara. So how can you do it? How can you say by wine you can give it to the kohen? It has no value. Says the Gemara. The overlay. So you tell me a broken thing, it's held together, so therefore there's no real loss. But if it's Nisgalsa, there's nothing you can do with it. How can you decide that this barrel should become truma? What are you going to do with Nisgalsa, the snake poison? But says, yes, there's a way you can use it. The overlay, he puts it through a strainer. We turn the brayso that a strainer there is the problem of gilui. If the bottom keli, which is trapping all of this wine, is exposed. But if it's covered, so you have a one pot on top of another, you have a strainer above there. So even though the above is megula, ain't bamishum gilui. But the bottom, what's the contents on the bottom after going through the strainer is not a problem. Why? The poison of a snake is like a sponge. The tzaf floats above. So therefore, you could use the wine in the case of gil if you go through a strainer. Says the Gemara, Lav Itmal didn't be learned. When do we say if it goes through a strainer, it's all right? It floats on top. You didn't sort of mix it together. You mix it together also. So when you're pouring from the barrel, automatically it gets mixed as it it lands on the bottom and it all gets mixed together. So again, it's poisonous and there's no benefit. Well, how can you say this will be truma for a kohen? Also, Nami the shot fillet. We're talking about over here that you didn't hold it high and you pour it down, we got mixed. You put the strainer right at the end of the barrel, and the other barrel on the bottom is right beneath it, so therefore there's no mixing here because it's right next door. You tell me Nechemia holds you can actually give this truma to the kohen. But Tanya we learned turn me you're allowed to give truma from one tummy on another tummy. From one toy to another toy barrel. From a toy barrel on a tummy barrel. But you cannot use a tummy barrel to use that as truma for the rest of the remaining barrel, which are toy. Obviously, it has to be similar. Nechemia says even tummy al tummy litrim. He says you cannot give truma from one tummy to give barrel another. From each barrel, you have to give its own truma. Ela b'shal demai. Only if it's demai. Demai means domai. We're not sure what the situation is. It was by an amoris. We don't know if they gave the mice enough. So we answer hachinam b'shal demai. Some about demai. Amar we said b'shem by oil yasikain. Don't do that. May hefsid koyin. By oil we said don't turn into truma because you're causing the koyin a loss. The koyin, well, ice can fall on the ground. You can no longer use the truma. Says the Gemara, why oil do we say it's a loss? Because the kohen could have used tamadig oil for fuel. So yayinami rolazil, but wine also is a loss if it falls to the ground. Why? Because the kohen could have used it for zila, for pouring it on the ground. So the Gemara says, so why do we allow the kohen? Why do we allow you to leave the wine in the broken barrel and make that truma, and then the wine falls on the ground? We're saying there's no loss to the kohen. There is a loss to the kohen. You could have used it for fragrance. Now we can't. So the Gemara, you can tell me what zilav is not really considered something significant. What are you talking about? If you want to drink wine, pay up to seller for the amount of a leg. But if you want to use the wine to pour on the ground, you better get better quality wine and pay 2 slime. So we see that ziluf is worth more than just drinking. We're talking about brand new wine. When does wine have fragrance? When it's old wine, fermented and everything. This is brand new wine, like grape juice. But you can always leave it around and wait till it gets to age and then use it. So there's a loss to the kohen. So we say no. Also, we don't like it hanging around Tomadika wine because something might go wrong. You might drink it, forget that. We don't encourage that at all. And therefore, we don't care if the wine gets lost and falls to the ground because there's no loss to the kohen. There's nothing the kohen could have done with the wine anyway. Second, you come to the color. Oil also, leaving it around. You don't use all the oil in one go over time. So we answered the manach beklemos. You take the oil and you put it into a miyasekeli. And therefore you're not going to use it for anything else. No became also wine the wine. Let's encourage the person to put it in a miyasekeli, and therefore you won't use it for anything else. So what answers that doesn't make sense. The whole purpose is you want to have a nice fragrance. The keli must come under that way. You can take the wine and put it in a miyasekeli. It'll take away the whole fragrance. What's the point? Says the Gemara, but the Kol Atzma, this very point, are we worried if you leave it around your house, you might end up doing something wrong, is an argument of Tanaim from Beis Shammai Basil. The Tanya, we actually learned, if we had a similar idea right at the beginning, the end of the first paragraph of Psachim. The time we learned, Chavish Yain, a barrel of wine shall Truma of Truma, Shinit Mas. You have a barrel of wine of Truma that became Tamei. Is Beis Shammai says, what should you do? Tishafech Hakol, pour the whole thing out in one go. We don't want you to have Tamadika wine hanging around your house. So get rid of the whole lot. And Beis Hillel says, Tasazil, no, you can leave it around and use a little bit of wine at a time for fragrance. I will make a compromise. Bit buys at home, the wine is right there, then Tasazil, you can go ahead and use it for zila because you use the whole wine straight away and use it for fragrance. But beside, if it's out in the field, so you have to schlep it all the way to your house. In the meantime, you might want to drink a wine, and you'll forget that this is truma tameya. Tishafech hakol, pour it out where it is. Or you can have another version. Biyash, an old wine that you don't have to leave it around at all. You can use it then tasa zila, even if you use it a couple of days, it's all right. There's new wine, but you have to leave it for a long time to age. To shafech hakol, pour it out. They said to him, "You're not a compromiser. You're not considered a compromise. And why not? A compromise is if Beis Shammai would have said, "I don't care if it's the house or the field, pour the whole thing out." If Beis Hillel would have said, "I don't care the house or the field, use it for fragrance," and you come along and say, "Well, the house is one way and the field is another way," that's called a compromise. Neither of them brought it up. You're the one who brought up this issue. There, you're creating a new concept. Rabbi Tam says, Shlishi means a third generation. The big giants here, that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing, and you're 2 generations later, and you want to stick your nose in. Ein hachra shlish is a person from a third generation cannot be machriv